Hi, I'm Andrea Zundell.
And I'm Carrie Dale, and this is our podcast. Collectively, we spend our days serving our clients and helping them get the keys to their new home. We spend so much time learning, growing, and expanding our knowledge of lending and real estate to better ourselves, and we want to share all of that knowledge here with you.
We will explore everything you need to know about housing and lending. How much of a house can I really afford? What are closing costs? And what the heck is an escrow account?
Do I really need a real estate agent? How can I beat out other buyers in this super competitive market? Is this house priced right? These chats are a collection of key information we all need to get into a new home.
And this is the Key Collection Podcast. Well, welcome.
Yeah, we excited to have Debbie Poole here. She's an appraiser here in Southern Oregon. Debbie, welcome.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Thanks. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into appraising?
Sure. I've lived in the Rogue Valley for 24 years, and I worked at Harry and David as an executive for about 3 years and got burned out and looked for my next career. Took a break and decided to think about a couple of things, and it turned out that appraiser courses were being offered right away, and so I had to make a quick decision. I said, yeah, I love looking at houses. I've always just enjoyed houses, and I still would go to open houses, even though I see them all the time.
You still do?
I still like houses, yeah.
Me too.
This one I haven't seen.
I think you're in the right profession then. I imagine, like ourselves, most people don't really know what the appraisal process entails. Can you share a little bit about what that looks like to you?
Of course. So I usually either get a call from an individual who's maybe a family member died and they need an estate value, and it's usually a retrospective, so it's back to whatever the date of death was. And so I'll, set that up with them and go, do the inspection just like any other inspection, and the process is exactly the same. It's a different form because we have forms specifically for lenders, for Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, all of that, or private appraisals. Mm-hmm. So the form's a little different. The information is basically the same. Also, I do, of course, lender work mm-hmm. when there is some. Mm-hmm. Right now, that's a little thin.
So is that where the lender goes directly to you with the request?
They don't. They go to an appraisal management company, mm-hmm. and they're no longer allowed to talk to appraisers, mm-hmm. as you're probably aware. Now, realtors can talk to appraisers, and the lender I could talk with the lender as long as it's nothing to do with valuation. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If it's a clarifying question, I could, but if it's through an AMC, I just go mm-hmm. through the AMC.
So when you go out to appraise a house, you go out, you take measurements. What else do you do? Right.
Well, and measurements are a big deal mm-hmm. these days, which I'm hoping more realtors will understand. We've just this year been given ANSI standards, which is American National Institute of something.
Okay.
Anyway, it's a national standard for all appraisers nationwide. And we are required to appraise the home based on exterior dimensions to the inch or tenth of a foot.
Okay.
Which is a crazy amount, to the inch. And then there's also the more confusing part is attic spaces, the converted attics. Mm-hmm. The ceilings have to be a minimum of 7 feet, and many of them are not. And so they cannot be included in the total square footage of the house.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, it can make a big difference. Okay. And they can be included on the appraisal, but it has to be on a separate line. So it's not going to be included in the total square footage, but it should be accounted for elsewhere on the sales grid, mm-hmm. if you see that. And then, basements, daylight basements is another thing that throws things into a confusing state sometimes because they have to be also looked at separately from the main area of the square footage.
So are you able to count a daylight basement toward the overall square footage of the home?
It does, but it's on a separate line, so it's adjusted separately.
Got it. Okay.
So that makes for a lot of adjustments.
And what if that basement, I know that I think there's a little confusion about when square footage is truly underground. Do you know if
Well, a daylight basement is by definition at least one wall is against soil.
Okay.
And anything that has that is considered a daylight basement. I mean, if it was a cellar completely surrounded, we don't really even have those around here.
Yeah.
This room is.
Completely surrounded by
Yep, that's
soil.
all. It's all underground on
Oh,
this
this
side.
room.
Now, not out this way, but this room here is. Yeah,
Wow,
yeah.
you have a cellar.
Yeah. I know they're rare.
But you can access it through the door here,
Yeah.
so that it's not, you don't have to take stairs directly down to this
True.
room.
Right.
True.
So
But-
then when you get properties like that, are you having to look for other properties that have the same type of basement?
Exactly,
Okay.
yes. So then, right, and they aren't often talked about much in the listings. So as an appraiser, I have to scour through those and look for anything that might indicate that there's a lower level, or maybe they'll use the word basement, but not usually, and then look at the county records and confirm that that is indeed a daylight basement, and figure out what the square footage is, and hopefully the county has taken out the garage already so that they don't include that as square footage.
So it would be helpful for you as an appraiser if the listing remarks actually said that there is a true basement, and if they specified the square footage of that area.
Right. Well, they wouldn't even have to they could include that in the total, but if I just knew that
Okay.
it had a finished daylight basement or a finished basement, you could say
Right.
finished basement.
So it sounds like this takes a lot of time
It
to do an
does.
appraisal. What is
Especially, on hillsides.
the most? Yeah. So outside of that, is there anything else that is like the most time consuming for you?
I'd say that verifying sales is a big deal. So just looking up all that information on the county records, and reviewing the MLS listings, which, the photos are amazing, and I look at all the photos. Sometimes the longest process is just my computer loading all those photos. And sometimes my Wi-Fi is not the best, but I go through them. What's really helpful is if they're labeled, because so many times, if it's a big house especially, there will be a lot of photos and a lot of verbiage about all the amenities and what's, all these great things. Well, when I look at the photos, I'm like, I don't even know where that is. It'd be really helpful to know what room it is so that I could count it as a bedroom or, whatever it is.
Yeah. We mentioned this before, finding like properties, but can you tell us about how you come up with other comparable sales to use?
Sure. I do a bracketed search. So that means I'll do 20% more than the total square footage of the subject house and 20% less. And then I'll look for comparable site sizes. If it's oversized, then I'll try to limit that to oversized. So I start with the most similar I can get to first, to see if I can find any sales within the last 3 months, which is...
Is that what it is? It's 3 months?
They want to, we have to have a minimum of 2 sales within the last 90 days.
Wow.
And in a changing market, they don't want any older sales. And if you do have them, because sometimes you just don't have a choice what's comparable, then you have to adjust them. And so that means also figuring out how the market's changing, the percentage, higher or lower,
That's
depending
been
on what's happening.
A wave for you this last 2 years, then.
Yeah, it's been a lot, yeah.
Yeah.
So
How about in terms of distance from the subject property? How far out are you able to go?
well, they ask that we go no further than a mile.
Okay.
Of course, if it's rural, that can be 10 miles. It depends on what it is. It could be 50 miles. But But in town, they ask that you keep it within a 1 mile range, which is not always possible. You know, if it's a hillside home in Ashland or, you know, East Medford, and you look within a mile, sometimes that might push you below the area, like in Ashland, below the boulevard, and those are not the homes I'm looking for. So I have to go through all those comps and eliminate the ones that I know are below the boulevard and just look for things that are hillside. So so a mile is not always far enough.
You bring up above the boulevard and below the boulevard, and I think that raises the question of, well, not even the question, but I think the statement of how important it is to have an appraiser who's familiar with our market and our area.
Right.
I mean, what's your opinion on appraisers coming in from out of area and trying to determine like a fair assessment of value when they don't necessarily know our market?
Well, I don't think it's good. But I hear about it. You know, I've heard it has ruined a few deals. I've heard of people who got way lower than what they should have, sellers that, you know, that was their retirement, and it just didn't pan out because the appraiser came in really low, and that's really sad. So I think it's very important.
Yes, I would agree. Why do you think that one appraiser may value a property differently than another appraiser?
Well, because they might not know the area. That would be one good reason.
Yes.
And other than that, I've seen, like I just bought a house 1.5 years ago, and I sent the appraiser the comps that I thought were good, which you can send any appraiser the comps that you think are the best. I don't know if he used any of the comps I sent, which I was really surprised.
Wow.
But it was fine. He did a good job. And I was like, I don't know that I would have picked that one. So it's personal preference, I guess. I mean, I hate to say that, but it's all opinion.
It is.
And it's based on what I think is the most similar and what, you know, and I'm looking for a location, you know, closeness, how, and also how I think a buyer would react. Sometimes a home is not updated, and it seems like in the last few years, only the really updated homes were selling well. To me, it's from my perspective, it seemed like the majority of them were market ready.
Interesting.
We didn't see a lot of homes that were just a mess, and sometimes that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah,
especially if I'm doing an estate, it could be a mess. And
Right.
you know, I need to find comparables for that.
So as a realtor, a lot of times my clients will ask me, hey, what can you do to help this appraisal? Like if I have sellers, you know, they're wanting to make sure they get value. If I have buyers, they're wanting to make sure they're not overpaying. And so what am I allowed to do or talk to you about or share with you? Or
Well, you could certainly give me the comparables that you used to reach that sale price.
Okay.
That's really helpful. And not active listings that haven't sold.
Okay. Okay, so not active ones, so actually only ones that
Now,
are closed?
And I do use I do use pending sales, and I
Okay.
do use active listings to support it, especially in a changing market. They require
Okay.
that we add that in because they want to see if it's really going down. Does that show up in the active listings that they're lower, or if it's same thing if it's going up, you know, are the pending sales right up there?
But if you're trying to fetch a higher value, an active listing isn't necessarily going to carry a lot of
No, I've
weight.
got to find closed sales.
Yes.
and so that's the biggest part. Now, if you have sales that you've seen, I've had a few agents they'll give me a list of comparables, and they've seen those homes, and they'll say, now this one has this and this and this. This one is, you know, has a terrible view, or things that I might not be able to see that are not in the listing.
Right.
And I drive by the comps, all of them, always, but I might not be able to see certain things from the exterior. So it's helpful if you know things.
Like upgrades that have been made to the
Yeah,
property. How
right.
much does that impact your opinion of value? So if you know that you're comparing one house that has Corian countertops and then this other one has quartz, things like that. I mean, does that
Yeah,
strongly
it would
influence?
have to be more than countertops, but an overall update. Yeah, I look at windows, doors, roofs, countertops, full kitchen remodels, full bathroom remodels, or maybe just all the floors in the house. Or updated paint inside and outside. There's so many things you can look at that will, in my opinion, affect a buyer. They'll really like the house because it's move-in ready. Or it's not. Maybe it just has certain systems updated. So I take that into account, and that is, again, it's just a judgment call. So I might compare a house that has new furnace and flooring to a house that's really, really updated, and I'd make an adjustment.
Okay. So what happens if a lender or a buyer or seller, whichever party is involved, sees your appraisal and they say, wow, I really don't agree with this. I feel like it should have been higher. Do they have any recourse? Is there any possibility of discussing it and getting that changed? How does that look?
Yes, you would have to put in a formal request to have it changed, and you would need to send proof. You need to send comps, or if you disagreed with, if there was a mathematical error or something like that. I mean,
Does that
should
go
be
to
corrected.
you? Or does it go
It goes from the lender to the appraisal management company to me.
Okay. And then,
yes,
okay.
it has to go through the lender. The
Okay.
lender has to make that request.
Okay.
And that's totally legitimate. And as an appraiser, we have to respond. We can say, I refuse to do that. I stand by my opinion, but that's not. I don't find that very professional. And I have only had one or two requests in
To
my
relook at
career.
it.
And I did. I reviewed every comp, and then I stated why I either added it in or said why I wouldn't use it. And sometimes they were just unreasonable, laughable requests. I was like, yeah, that's not going to fly.
Well, I think that says a lot that you really do entertain the idea that you're willing to revisit it. I think
Sure. And the other thing that I try to do in my business is, if I see that I'm not coming in at the sales price, I mean, I look at a sales price and go, well, it was two reasonable people that came to this. It seems like that should be market value. And if it's really not going to make it, I call the agents and go, okay, what am I not seeing here? Are there other comps I didn't see? Is there something else going on? And what's really helpful up front is if I have a list of remodels, repairs, the cost of those, at least within the last 5 years. Sometimes there's updates that have been done, that are older, but they deteriorate over time, and that value goes away over time. But major systems, things like that, I really want to know. And I also want to know if it's done with permits. Often you can tell if it's not been done professionally, because the do-it-yourselfers, they don't always look the best.
That actually does bring up a good other question, is how do you appraise? So if you go into a property and it was a garage that was converted to living space, but it wasn't permitted, are you pulling permits before you go and assess the property?
No.
Okay.
No.
So what would give you reason to look into whether or not that garage area was permitted?
Well, the lender requires that we state whether or not it was permitted on garage conversions specifically. And so I ask the owners.
Okay.
And they're usually upfront about it. And if they're not, I could go to the county and find out. I'd rather just ask them and get the information. But the other thing that has to be in line with that is it's got to have a permanent source of heat consistent with the rest of the house. And it's got to be built out to the similar quality and design, and just really fit in with the house. If it's just a garage, it still has a concrete floor, and they put up drywall, that's not necessarily something I could count as living area. It really depends on if it has heating specifically. That's the biggest component.
Wow. I need to go back really quick to what you were saying about calling agents, because I just love that, and I need to say how much I appreciate it.
Oh.
And the main reason is I think so many are unaware of why you're doing comps a certain way. I mean, like, great example I had this summer was I didn't quite understand why comps were coming on a certain townhome. And, we don't have a lot of townhomes in town. So it's really hard to come up with a price for those. And that appraiser was so great at explaining and saying, look, this is this. These are where I can pull. I can't pull current ones. I really have to have the sold ones. And what else is there? And so, anyways, you sharing that with people is fantastic. So thank you.
Well, sure. Yeah, it makes. Well, I want everybody to be happy in the deal.
Yeah.
And if there's anything I'm missing, I want to know that too.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Given the pretty drastic changes that we've seen in the market recently, I mean, over the past 6 to 8 months, how has that impacted your job and your process?
Well, just since they started raising interest rates, that very same week, all appraisers got a huge loss of work.
Uh-huh.
It just, of course, refinances are not happening, and that's a chunk of work right there. And then there's, as you know, their sales are not going through necessarily. And we're also, the ones that are often given waivers.
Yeah.
And so that does not require an appraisal. So it's just been a lot of hits to the appraisal business.
Yeah. And then how about in terms of values changing? I mean, because it does seem like we're seeing some decreasing values.
Are we? Yeah. Yeah, I'm afraid we are.
Yes.
Yeah, and some areas more than others. And I was surprised. I did an appraisal in White City a couple weeks ago, and everything had gone down. It was very clear, dramatically, the prices had gone down. And I'm looking at more high-end homes, and it doesn't seem like they're getting hit as hard, which is kind of the opposite of what it was when we had the big decline back in 05, 06, 07. That, at that time, our high-end homes were the hardest hit first, and low-end were not. But I think it has to do with affordability. And so at the lower ranges, I'm afraid that the buyers are just have been knocked out of that tier.
Right.
And they just can't afford those homes.
So not all of our listeners are Southern Oregon, but you mentioned White City, and we've talked about Ashland here. Do you see like a major shift in values, even just different around the valley, whether it be Ashland or Medford or, Central Point? I mean, do you see the area shifting differently, or all the same, or?
It shifts differently, not only from place to place, but also within Ashland. Like I said, the high-end homes are going to be different from the low-end homes. And a larger property is going to, just like a rural property could be different from something in town. It's all over the board. Okay. So I have to research every single assignment. I can't count on MLS statistics to tell me what the market's doing. I really have to look at very comparable homes, and I still use the 1004 MC form. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
But it does, if you're bracketing your sale well enough, it can give you a good range, and I tend to look year over year as well. So year over year in Ashland, in any case, in a lot of areas, we are not lower than we were the prior year yet.
Yeah.
Because it's all kind of averaging out. And so we're still, and in some cases we're about the same as this time last year. In some cases we're lower. So, and I think I saw one the other day that was higher, and I was like, that was interesting.
Well, how about with the values changing, does that change how far back you are willing to look for comps?
I always push to have as many comps in the last 90 days as possible. If I can have all of them in the last 90 days, unless it's a unique home, in which case we have to bracket all features. So we have to, if it had a pool, an in-ground pool, I have to have homes with in-ground pools, and there may not be many. I just did one that was a 1960s ranch house, and there are not many of them with pools.
Yeah.
And only one that sold in the last year in Ashland. And so it was tough. I was like, that was my only comparable. And, other than that, they were just high-end. All the high-end homes had pools. But a low-end home really didn't.
Yeah.
But I have to find something. And so I might go back a year if it's a feature that I have to find. Because the lender's going to ask for it.
Right.
So I might as well start looking.
Yeah. Have you ever completely declined an assignment because you couldn't find a comparable sale?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's some crazy things out there.
I'm sure. How do conventional appraisals differ from FHA and VA appraisals?
Well, it boils down to the inspection. And FHA and VA are looking for health and safety issues. Conventional, they want the roof to be good and the foundation to be good for conventional. And those are the two things that we have to look at, and it has to have a minimum 2-year life on the roof. And you just want a foundation that's not all cracked up and falling apart. It's holding the house up. So, but for FHA and VA, there's a lot more that goes into it, and that is all in the inspection. And it's looking for peeling paint. It's looking for a lack of handrails on, more than 3 or more stairs or something like. I think it's got to be more than 3 stairs. So it's looking for places where the homeowner could get hurt, or where the house would be in danger of being dry rot, things like that. So we're looking at leaks in the bathroom and under sinks, and there's a lot of things that we look for on an FHA.
Yeah.
And I don't personally do VA, but I know that their mandate is to provide good housing at a low cost for veterans, and that's their whole thing. And what I did learn, since I knew I was coming today, was that for FHA that they have reduced the amount down for your buyer from 3.5% to 3%. So they're trying to keep up with making things more affordable.
Interesting.
Is there more of a time requirement on your part when you get an FHA or government loan assignment?
No, it's the same. It's the same as because the same lenders do FHA as conventional, and they understand if they're local, especially, they understand our market. There's a few national lenders that want it in 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
It's like, which is pretty tough to pull off.
Yes.
Well, last month we were talking about ADUs and their growing popularity, especially around here. How do you determine whether it's an ADU versus being a multifamily unit?
Right, and that is a big consideration. And it seems like, it just seems to me that since the state has said that you can have more residences on a single-family residential property, in town, that they've popped up everywhere. They are all over the place, and it does kind of throw a wrench into the appraisal process, because if you have to figure out how to value those.
Yeah, sure.
And it's not an exact science, and so that makes it hard. But what you would consider an ADU or a separate unit, like a multifamily, could be considered a duplex or just a 2-family property, would be if it had its own address. Both of them had their own address. They both had their own meters. And let's see, what else? I looked this up. Had more than 2 bedrooms, and it has to be, either way, it has to be within zoning. So if I called it a multifamily, that has to be consistent with that zoning. Whereas an ADU can be in the home, the main home. It can have the door coming from the main home in, but a separate residence, it should be separate. It could be attached, but it should not have doorways going through.
Okay.
So a follow-up question to that then, if you were appraising a property, it's zoned single family, and it has a detached ADU that has a separate meter and a separate address, is that would you still appraise it as a true ADU because of the zoning?
Yeah, I'd have to do more research and just check on the zoning and see if it was legal with that zoning. And it also, it's a little nebulous. We can also look at how it's been marketed before, if it has been, how it was done, if it was done as a multifamily or as an ADU.
Would it be helpful? I guess I think it's good for both of us to know how to kind of clear some muddy sounding waters. Would it be helpful if the agent who's, listed the house, if they were to provide you with permits showing, that they permitted that structure to be built as an ADU specifically? Like that's how they...
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
always, yeah.
So
Permits
just-
are great.
I would say what I'm hearing is the more I can provide you, the
Yes.
better it is for all of us.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Right. And there are times when that's a time when a lender will contact me and say, this is the property, how would you appraise it? Because they don't know what kind of loan to do for it.
Exactly.
If it's really multifamily or just an ADU.
That's the challenge I run into often because it does, if it's a multifamily, it impacts the down payment requirement and the interest rate pricing, the loan
Right.
program. So
Right.
that's where it is a little bit challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. And it would normally be rented and
Yeah.
there's a lot of things like that. So it's a little bit, can be a little bit tricky, the borderline between those two.
Yeah. And again, it sounds like part of it is still subjective.
Maybe they're really pushing to get better
Okay.
defined boundaries because we do need to know it's one way or the other.
Right. I agree. And you mentioned something about the value piece. How do you go about valuing an ADU?
I try to avoid them. Well, yeah, it's a tough one. I try to, when I do have one, I try to find all comps with ADUs or studios or something that I can compare that to, and then make as few adjustments as possible. I want to find things that are as similar as I can, and it can be tough. But like you said, there's more and more of them out there. So
Yeah.
so there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of properties with ADUs all of a sudden.
Well, and you can't value the ADU the same way you value the home. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
Right. It's a secondary living
Yeah.
area. So it's really the primary residence is where the most of the value is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it can be a little bit painful for people who, spend $100,000 building an ADU and they get the appraisal
Yeah.
report back and realize, what? I only got $50,000 added or whatever.
Well,
the case may be.
they should be happy with that. Really.
Well,
Because you have to think about your buyers. Are they willing to pay $100,000 for that little ADU?
Right.
I think
know.
everyone just needs to realize that the price per square footage is not the same. It's just, it can't be.
Right. Well, and in essence, what we look at is what is the buyer willing to pay?
Yeah.
And it's just like when you put in a swimming pool, you could spend $100,000 on that, and a buyer's not going to pay an extra $100,000 for that pool unless you're in the multi-million-dollar level home and it's really
Right.
spectacular. They might, but
Yeah.
just a regular in-town house you're not going to get your full amount back.
What is a standard adjustment for a pretty standard pool?
Let me think. I use a lot of surveys, and so I will sometimes survey agents in this area and ask them what their buyers would pay for a pool.
Interesting.
And I've found anywhere from 10 to 20,000. And then I also have national surveys of appraisers, and so this is where they've asked appraisers a variety of questions, and one of them is the pool, and they actually break it down by area in terms of temperature and how many days over 80 degrees it is or 90 degrees. I can't remember what that was, but it's all on this survey, and so you can look and there's percentages, and you can give it a percentage of the home price.
Oh,
Or you can give it a flat amount, flat rate, or so there's a variety of ways to value them.
yeah. I did not know that.
I didn't either.
So I know that since I order the appraisal, me being the lender, many people are unclear who an appraiser is working for. So can you explain who is your client?
Right. My client is the lender. And the appraisal is for the lender. And I'm not allowed to talk about it or give it to anybody else. I mean, it goes through the appraisal management company, but that is for the lender. So,
Not
yeah.
the buyer.
No. And I know buyers get upset over that.
Yeah.
but the lender's required, if asked, to supply them a copy of the appraisal within 3 days before their closing. And yeah, and it doesn't come from me.
Yeah.
I am
Yeah.
not allowed to
Send it to the buyer.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, we send it to the buyer immediately, upon receipt. But yeah, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know our listeners, and I'm sure you've heard nationally about all the stories about appraisers breaking fair housing laws, judging value based on somebody's race or status, or that, those terrible things. Have you seen much of that around here or in Oregon in general?
Well, I wouldn't know about Oregon in general.
Okay.
And I haven't read any articles about it happening in Oregon.
Okay.
So I would have heard about that, I think, but I haven't heard anything. And I'm part of an appraiser group, and we meet on a monthly basis, and we did talk about that because that was really stunning, some of the things that have come out. And it's generally in large urban areas where there's just a lot of properties, a lot of people, and I guess a lot of appraisers, and maybe they're just not as ethical as they need to be. But we discussed it, and it's like none of us had come across that.
That's good.
Or found that. We were all really stunned because we try to be as ethical as we can. We're not, when people say, "Oh, my house is a mess," I'm like, I'm not looking at your stuff. I'm looking at the house.
That's great.
It doesn't matter to me. Their furniture, their pictures, who's there. It does matter if they have lots of animals and little kids all over running around, because I could trip over them. But, but as far as just who lives there, that is not my concern. I'm really there to look at the house, and I'm looking at the house and the neighborhood and just how finding homes that match with that.
But I appreciate that your group discussed it and
Oh,
at least
yeah.
was aware of it and
Right.
and had the conversation.
Well,
because
and it's had me pause when I've been in that situation and go, okay, am I doing anything unfair here? And really look at it to wonder how. I'm not sure how anybody could do that. I mean,
people do. I mean,
Yeah.
but it's good to at least self-evaluate and say,
Right.
am I doing this? And talk about it, because I think it's when it's not being talked about that it happens, and we're not aware. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you're not that way. I knew you weren't anyways, but it reaffirms my confidence in the Valley.
Have there been any recent changes to the appraisal process that we should know about?
I don't think so. It's a pretty standard process. It was set up, years and years ago, and it's through all the different changes and in lending and in what's. If anything, we have more requirements over time, but the basics of appraising remain the same.
Well, you've given us so much to think about today. Is there anything else that you can think of that we didn't ask that you think we should share with our clients, with public, anyone?
I don't. I think you guys were really thorough. Okay. Well, and I appreciate your giving me a heads up with some questions in advance, because I had to think about some things, and
Yes.
and just know where I was going to be coming from.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well,
I really appreciate being here and being able to hopefully give a little information that maybe some realtors don't have.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
And I'm always happy to take questions. I do get people that call me, realtors that call me and ask questions, and that's always welcome.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for your willingness to be candid. And from the sounds of things, you're on our team. I mean,
Right.
we all want the same thing.
Yeah.
So it is really nice to be able to have better explanations when necessary and just a better understanding.
Yeah, even if you can't go directly to him.
Yeah, yeah.
But I can give Debbie a call. Well, thank you again.
Yeah.
And thank you all so much. We're so excited to have you here, and we look forward to talking to you again next month.
Yeah.
If you have any questions, don't make sure you ask it in the comments. And anything else?
Until next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.